morning, everyone. Thank you for coming or for being online. It's a pleasure to introduce you to Frederico Neves, and Juliana Kuchenbecker. Both of them are based at the Federal University of Minas Gerais in Brazil. And this is going to be a split talk. The first part will be Fred giving. Fred is a doctor in ecology by the Federal University of Minas Gerais. He was a doctor in 2009, but before that, since 2004, he was a professor at the State University of Montes Claros, okay, until 2011 when he moved to be professor of ecology at the Federal University of Minas Gerais. And he works in insect ecology and interactions between plants and insects. Juliana did her master's also at the State University of Montes Claros, working on top-down effects of insect herbivory in the Cerrado. And she got her PhD in 2022 in the Federal University of Minas Gerais, working in this topic, the spatiotemporal dynamics of insects in altimontane forest islands. And now she's working at the synthesis center of coordinated by the Federal University of Goiás on biology, on ecology, evolution, and biodiversity conservation. And she's extending further her work to include anthropogenic effects. And now it's time for Fred to start. Thanks to both for coming.
Good morning. I appreciate everyone for the presence. The lights, please. Today, I am going to talk about some ideas that I have been reading and thinking in the recent months here in my sabbatical time in the museum. And in this presentation, I will talk about the campo rupestre system, the long-term ecological research, it's a project, and a study of 10 years, including insects in this system. Well, what do you imagine when I tell you that I work in a megadiverse tropical system? In this system, no? Yeah, the tropical rainforest is truly marvelous. But today I will talk about this tropical megadiversity system, the campo rupestre, in the mountains of central of Brazil. Campo rupestre is herbaceous arbustive vegetation mosaic prone to fires with outcrops of quartz and iron rocks, along with sandy rock and humid fields. Campo rupestre has a latitudinal, here in red, distribution between 10 and 22 degrees south, and has a station of 1,200 kilometers and more than 66 squares area. It has an altitudinal variation, like with a maximum elevation of 2,072 meters. But in the past, these mountains were more than 7,000 meters high. To vast extent, like you can see here in red, it received influence from various biomes, such as Atlantic forest in the south, the Cerrado in the central region, and Caatinga in the north. So it's a megadiverse system. Have more than 6,000 species of plants that represent 3% of the world total, 11% of the Brazilian flora, and less than 1% of the national territory. And 40% of the species are endemics. Some picture of the plants. Campo rupestre is a very old system. It was already present in the mountains when Brazil is still connected with Africa, coinciding with the period of diversification of angiosperms and various orders of insects. And one of the oldest families is the Velociacea. Here in the picture, the popular name is Canela de Ema in the systems. Well, in 2009, Hooper elaborated the oak-bill theory, which highlights certain landscapes that are old, climatically buffered, and infertile, and in general is very diverse systems. And in this paper, we showed that campo rupestre is an oak-bill. The system has remained stable for at least 65 million years in this region. In this way, I hope to have convinced you that campo rupestre has a latitudinal station, altitudinal variation, influence from different biomes, and long evolutionary time. In other words, it's an excellent model for evolutionary and ecological studies, okay? For me. Now, I will show a little about our long-term ecological research, the PELG. Here they look in this system. This project starting in 2011, and here the location in Serra do Cipó, along the mountains, and we have 7 work stations along the elevations in this area. Over time, we have worked in various teams, such as this seed dispersal, pollination, establishment of plants, nutrient cycling, and interactions like herbivory and competition. The teams involve different groups, such as insects, like ants, butterflies, dung beetles, plants, and fungi. As you can see here in these pictures, the landscape changes when we move up to mountain. Starting with a cerrado in the lower sides to an open landscape with more rocks, we move up here. So change a lot. There are 7 climate stations in the mountain. This station captured 14 parameters. And today I will talk about temperature and humidity. In each site, we have information about vegetation structure. So, in this figure, we can observe that pattern of decreased temperature with increased elevation. Here, we observe an opposite pattern of the humidity that increase with elevation. In other words, when we move up to mountain, the climate becomes colder and wetter, okay? For plants, we have recorded 278 species. And we observe a pattern of decreased species richness with elevation here in this figure. Special pattern. Well, and what about the insects? We select 3 groups of bioindicators insects: ants, butterflies, and dung beetle. These are very diverse groups that have diversification along with angiospermous plants, and are abundant insects, well distributed, conspicuous, and easy to capture. And they present different mobility and life history capabilities, including social groups like ants, solitary ones, good flyers, and utilize different resources, such as other insects, plants, or dung. As we can see in these figures, insects show a similar pattern of decreased species richness with elevation. But one question remains: how these insect communities change over time in terms of richness variation and compositional variation, like beta diversity along the time, over time, okay? To address this question, we gathered a team of experts to craft this paper, unveiling the dynamics of insect metacommunities through the decade of research in an elevational tropical gradient. Well, in this paper, we tested 2 main hypotheses. There is an increase in species richness variation, temporal beta diversity, and species gains with elevation. And there is a larger degree of variation in community dynamics in areas with higher climatic variation, including humidity and temperature. Okay? Here we can see the study area again, Serra do Cipó, in Minas Gerais, Brazil. And in this area, with the involving systematic sampling using 3 transects in each site over 5 years of sampling, 2030, 14, 17, 90, and 23. Sampling as was conducted once a year during the wet season, using specific traps for each group, like here the trap of butterflies, and here the traps, pitfall traps for ants and dung beetles in each year of sampling. About results. Over 10 years, we sampled 150 species of ants, 36 species of butterflies, and 63 species of beetles. We found that the pattern of decreasing in temperature and increased humidity with elevation remains consistent, no? Here and here. Only in the wet season in each year. However, we did not observe any relationship between temperature variation and humidity variation with elevation along the time. In other words, there is a variation in climatic data between years, but it's not associated with elevation. Regarding now special patterns for the insects. First, the accumulated data of 10 years in the figures show a consistent pattern of decreasing species richness with elevation. The pattern of decreased richness with increased elevation persists when we analyze data for each year. However, we observe no variation in the relationship with elevation between years and among groups. The different lines represent each relationship with elevation in each year. Regarding now temporal patterns, always between pairs of consecutive years, we found a positive relationship between species richness variation and elevation across the three groups: ants, butterflies, and the beetles. Regarding the gains and losses of species between pairs of years, in this figure, green symbols represent species gains and red symbols represent species losses. When we have green lines like here and here, there are more species gains. And when we have red lines here, here, and here, there are more species losses. Thus, we can verify that there is a variation between the predominance of species gains and species losses between pairs of years and among groups, without a trend of species losses over time, okay, along our 10 years. Still on temporal patterns, we did not observe a relationship between temporal beta diversity with elevation for all the groups. Regarding species gains, for ants and dung beetles, there is no relationship with elevation. But while the butterflies, we found the parts of years here, no, with a negative and a positive relationship with elevation, and other years with have a negative one. In the similar pattern, we found two species losses without a relationship for ants and dung beetles with elevation, but for butterflies, we found pairs of years with a positive relationship, like here, and other years with a negative one. And in terms of mechanisms that we analyze, there is no influence of climatic variations, temporal and humidity, and delta richness, beta diversity, and species gains for the three groups. We also did not observe any influence of variation of climatic data of species losses for ants and butterflies. But, however, in this figure, we can see a positive influence of variation of humidity in species losses for dung beetles. In other words, these insects may be more sensitive, no, to air humidity variation in this time. In conclusions, these three insect groups show a complex scenario of high temporal change in the species richness and composition, with difference among groups and large variation in the community during the sample years. And we verify similarities with previous studies on the temporal variation in the community without a trend of the loss of species over time, and without a clear relationship with elevation or climatic variations. So I would like to thank funding agencies, CNPq and CAPES, my university, Universidade Federal de Minas Gerais, and our space that we have now here in the museum. And a special thanks to Joaquim Hortal and team, no? And the fellow collaborators. And, of course, my project and the team of my laboratory, Laboratório de Ecologia de Insetos in our university. So, thanks for your attention. Gracias por la atenção. E agora, Juliana.
Good morning. Can you listen to me? Yes? So I'm going to continue Professor Frederico's talk by talking about a very special and unique system that is this altimontane forest islands that is immersed in everything that he has mentioned. So more specifically, we are going to talk about fire impact on this study system, as well as on this associated insect communities. Here's the content, as I already told you. We call these altimontane forest islands as capões de mata, and that's how I'm going to refer to them from now on. The capões de mata, what are they? They begin to emerge amidst the grassland matrix of the Espinhaço mountain range, starting from 1,200 meters of altitude. And they can be considered a natural and edapho-climatic formation. When I say they can be considered a natural formation, I mean that their formation is not associated with human activities, such as habitat fragmentation. And they actually depend on very specific characteristics of both soil and climate to develop and to maintain themselves. So that's why they are also considered an edapho-climatic formation, okay? These capões de mata are directly related to the high pattern of diversity found on tropical mountains. And they also protect important Brazilian hydrographic basin springs. I like to think in the system as true biodiversity reserves, or better yet, as the last refuges of biodiversity. And why is that? Imagine living down here, species of plants, species of animals, and with the rapid climate change that have been occurring, they have nowhere to go but up, right? So the capões de mata are right here as these last refuges of a biodiversity that would be doomed to disappear. Inside, they are exactly like this. Their floristic composition resembles those of the Atlantic forest domain, and their species composition includes families with a wide geographical distribution. Although many species are endemic, which potentially indicates that the formation of these capões de mata is quite ancient. And if we want to compare these capões de mata with lowland forests, they have a lower canopy, and they also have a higher abundance of epiphytes. Here in these pictures, you can see a lot of bromeliads, orchids, and everything else. And this high abundance of epiphytes is due to the high humidity that this system always presents. So here, in these pictures, you can see the capões de mata here surrounded by a lot of fog. And I can say it for sure because I took these photos myself, and it was around 11 a.m. So it's true, it's a high humidity that this system always faces. We have selected 14 capões de mata to conduct our studies. So you can see here in this map, these dark green forest patches representing our Capões de Mata. They are right here, located right here in our Serra do Cipó. This is our Espinhaço mountain range, our state, and our country, Brazil, Minas Gerais, Brazil. And these Capões de Mata are part of our PELD, our Long-Term Ecological Research Project. Here, I brought you some examples of papers published by our working group involving the study system and also the spatiotemporal dynamics of associated insect communities. So we have studies involving bees, wasps, ants, studies also involving butterflies, herbivorous insects, or a multi-taxa approach, and studies involving dung beetles and different sets of bioindicator insects. But considering that this study system is increasingly experiencing anthropogenic disturbances such as fire, we wonder, how does fire affect these forest islands and their associated insect communities? Well, firstly, we found an effect of fire frequency on the percentage of exposed soil of the Capões de Mata, where Capões de Mata with 2 fire events here presented higher percentage of exposed soil. We also found an effect of fire frequency on the soil components of this Capões de Mata, where you can see here that Capões with 2 fire events present higher concentrations of these components here and lower concentrations of these components here. 1 minute. And fire frequency also influenced the percentage of herbs where Capões with 2 fire events presented lower percentage of herbs. Additionally, we found an effect of post-fire time. I like to stay this way. Additionally, we found an effect of post-fire time on the percentage of herbs and shrubs, where Capões with longer post-fire time, measured in days here, presented both higher percentage of herbs and lower percentage of shrubs. We did not detect any influence of fire on any of this, on plant richness and abundance, on the average DBH and average high, on the percentage of tree cover, canopy cover, nor in the variation in canopy cover over time, and neither in the variation in landscape metrics over time, such as the area and perimeter of the Capões de Mata. But okay, what about the insects? How does fire influence these insect communities associated with this study system? Well, recently we published this paper involving these 5 bioindicator insect groups: ants, wasps, bees, butterflies, and dung beetles, where we assessed fire influence on their richness variation and their temporal beta diversity. What did we find? First, for these 3 groups here, bees, wasps, and butterflies, it was all good. That means that fire did not influence their richness variation nor the temporal beta diversity. But for these 2 groups here, ants and dung beetles, fire did influence their temporal beta diversity. What this means? This means that Capões with fire records, you can see here, burned and unburned Capões. So Capões with fire records presented higher values of temporal beta diversity, or presented a higher change in species compositions of both ants and dung beetles. And now we are working on this paper, but just focusing on herbivorous insects, assessing fire influence on their richness and abundance variation, as well as on their temporal beta diversity and species losses and gains. All of this, over time, we have 7 years of sampling, and in both canopy and understory. Firstly, we found an evident stratification regarding to data on richness and abundance variation. So you can see here that the understory presented higher numbers of this variation. But none of this was related to fire. Now, regarding to temporal beta diversity, species gains, species losses, we also have some interesting data. A ver, que ya ia empezar a hablar espanhol. We found that species compositions, the temporal beta diversity, varied less in the understory here, as you can see here, especially in capões with fire records. That is, these brown boxes here. And related to species gains, we found that we had more numbers of species gains here in the canopy, but not related to fire. And regarding to species losses, although unrelated to strata, we found that capões with fire records here presented less species losses, which is quite interesting because one would expect that fire is associated with a higher number of species losses rather than fewer. Well, okay, now that we are almost done, what are the conclusions of these studies? Firstly, and this is my favorite part, regarding the vegetation. We can say that this vegetation, the vegetation of this study system, is a kind of a balance. Why? Considering that we measured a bunch of characteristics of both the vegetation and the landscape of the study system, and fire influenced very few of them, we can think this way, that is in kind of a balance. And I particularly think that this adds new evidence to the current debate on alternative biome states. Why so? And this is very important. Previously, we had this megafauna here. And why I brought this here? Because I think moderate disturbances have always been, are, and will always be necessary for the maintenance of this kind of natural ecosystems, such our forest grassland mosaic here. So this megafauna here that we had previously is the one that we had in our study system. So we had there horses, paleolama, macrauchenia, saber-toothed tiger, bear, mastodon, toxodon, giant sloth, armadillos. We had all of this. And now, we don't have this megafauna, but we do have the increase in fire incidence and cattle presence, cattle grazing presence. So, I like to say that we urgently need to perpetuate our PELDs, our long-term experiments, to monitor this forest grassland mosaic and to better track how global change-related drivers really influence natural ecosystems. Now, regarding the bioindicator insects, we found that fire affected, influenced, just those that are less mobile, such as ants and dung beetles. And these may be related to their dispersal capacity, as you can see here in this ranking. And regarding to the herbivorous insects, we think fire homogenizes the system, causing it to vary less and result in a fewer losses of insects over time. And as a take-home message, I'd like to say to you that tropical and ancient mountains are a rich repository of biodiversity and have the potential to improve our theoretical understanding of the historical and contemporary factors driving biodiversity distribution, which is crucial for the long-term survival and well-being of people and nature. So that's it. I would also like to thank our partners, especially Joaquin, who welcomed us here since December, and he's also participating in these studies. Thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions, you can ask them in Spanish if it's possible.
Thank you, Juliana. Thank you, Fred. Any question?
Hello. Thank you for the talk. It was really good. I have one question regarding the island. So we saw how does the fire affect some plants, but you also showed that there was no effect of the fire in the tree cover and canopy. Is there a reason why the trees are not affected by the fire, or?
I think we just have moderate fires in our study system, moderate and low intensity, low frequency and low intensity. So I think that's why it affects just herbs and shrubs.
Okay. And another question to Fred. Is there any
Spanish?
No,
maybe.
in English, no problem.
English.
So is there any reason why you chose those three particular groups of insects to your study and not other ones, or?
Yes, firstly, because I like these three groups. And we have specialists in the three groups in our group of studies, and are easy to capture in the fields. We have systematic sample protocols and are independent of the researcher. Okay?
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good morning. I'm intrigued by how do these fires look like? Are they burning the whole area, affecting several of these islands, or maybe just their local? Are these Atlantic forest-like vegetation resistant to the fire, or do they die completely?
So, thank you for the question. And these forest islands are very, very specific because they have a different soil, they are more fertile, and they have this pattern of high humidity. So fire can't, until today, influence their landscape, their area, their perimeter. Until today, we had one forest island that burned almost everything, but that was it.
Thank you. I've got another question about fire, okay? Because it's I've just worked on the Cerrado directly. I've done field work in the Cerrado, but the fire frequency is quite high there. I mean, in some places it's one fire every 2 years, but it's not the same in the Atlantic forest. So it's what we were talking about. We've got islands of Atlantic forest. Mm-hmm. So I was wondering, how do you think, and perhaps that place that burned gives you a story, that will happen when you start to have mega fires? Because one of the good things that the Capones de Mata have is that they retain humidity so they are more resistant. But what will happen if you start to have mega fires, the kind of mega fires we are seeing now in the Mediterranean or Australia, or these fires that are really at higher temperatures?
Yeah.
Do you think they will resist to some extent because they are edaphic, or
No,
they will?
I don't think they have this resilience that we hope they have, but I don't think they have this. And I don't think, as well, as we are going to have these mega fires up there in these altimontane forest islands, because the fire we have there is mainly because the presence of cattle. And we have a moderate presence of cattle up there. So people put fire there to grow herbs to the cattle, and that's it. So mega fires, I don't think we are going to have so soon. And if we have, I think the capões de mata won't resist.
Okay, so you will expect that these stable states, well, there's two alternative stable states, where you have more herbs in the more mature state, and then will remain and showing that variability that we also saw in Fred's talk over time. Okay.
Yes.
Thanks.
Thank you for the talk. Very interesting. I'm not familiar with the setting, but I was really surprised about the diversity of dung beetles. Is it because there are cattle right now, or has it been the same all over the years, or what's the reason why there's so many species of dung beetles?
In the system, we have it's a very diverse system for dung beetles too, because have influence of Cerrado and Atlantic forest. So it's a diverse. Joaquin knows well this system too, like Cerrado and the Atlantic forest. So it's a very diverse system in general, for insects, plants, and in general.
If I may about that, is that also because dung beetles are highly diverse in the tropics, but you have two different in the two biomes, two relatively different faunas, but there you also have the influence of being a bit near the 2,000 meters, whereas with the Uroxis camp. So there are some high, there are very few lineages that are able to survive in the highest places. And here I think you've got the three of them coming in, because there are a couple of Uroxis in some places as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the thing. I think it's biogeographically it's a very interesting place. They are edaphic islands, and at the same time they retain things from three biomes actually.
Yeah, of course, of the story of the system, oldest, so accumulate species along the time, I think.
Rob?
This is kind of related to the last two questions and answers as well. So in the past, you had the megafauna there that I guess were grazing the trees and also the shrubs and the herbivorous vegetation. And you just mentioned that there are some cattle, but not too many.
Not too many.
And what about wild mammals grazing and browsing these landscapes? So were there grazing mammals there in between the loss of the megafauna and the introduction of some cattle grazed by humans? Were there grazing animals there that were through time that provided the habitat for the dung beetles and helped to maintain the structure of the vegetation and the risk of fire and that kind of thing?
Yes, it's a quite interesting question, this one, because we do have wild boar. How can we say this? The javali, wild boar. We do have this inserted in this system, but they are obviously not natural. They are from the people who create the cattle grazing. And so they provide the material for dung beetles as well. But now I don't think how it is right now about this question, because they are invasive and they are very prejudicial to the system, and I don't know what they've done about it.
But now, and you and our group worked to answer this question, the effect of crown and big herbs in the system. But in campo rupestre is not so complex. But when the cow into the islands, forest islands, is more complex. I don't know. You need experimental along the time to understand better.
Yeah, I don't know if it's part of your question, but now I'm working on this cattle presence and this fire incidents in these natural systems, and I believe that cattle works as a fire break in these forest islands, so they walk around it and do a natural fire break, and the fire don't enter. But once it enters, it's ugly. It's an ugly scenario.
And the dung beetles are using the cattle dung, and historically they would have used the dung from the megafauna.
Yes.
So between the megafauna, in the time between the megafauna and the cattle, what were the dung beetles using for their food and habitat?
Yeah, in the past, in these islands, I think that more monkeys. No? Yes, but sometimes we have to enter how can tapir in the system and the other mammals, but not common. It's not so common like in Pantanal or other system more lower, but there is some options of dungs.
Thanks, Rob, for the questions. So thanks, Fred and Juliana, for coming here and for giving the lecture. And we see everyone in the kiosk if you want.
Thank you.